The Lives of the Saints by the Reverend Alban Butler, taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. January 13th. Saint Kentigern, Bishop of Glasgow. This eminent saint of the ancient Church of North Britain was of royal blood among the Picts, or original inhabitants of that country, and born about the year 516. He was placed very young under the discipline of St. Servanus, bishop and abbot of Culross, a monastery situated upon the Firth which divides Lothian from Fife. By this holy prelate he was trained up in the perfect spirit of Christian meekness and piety. For his innocence and great virtues he was beloved by his master and all who were acquainted with that religious family, above all his fellow disciples, for which reason he was called Mungu or Mungo, which in the language of that country signified one dearly beloved. And this is the name which the Scots usually give him to this day. When he was grown up, by the direction of St. Servanus, he retired to a place called Glasgow, where he had led a solitary life in great abstinence, till the clergy and people earnestly demanded him for their bishop. He was consecrated by an Irish bishop, invited over for that purpose, and fixed his see at Glasgow, or Glasgow, where he assembled a numerous company of religious brethren, who formed their rule of life upon the model of the primitive Christians at Jerusalem. The saint's diocese was of vast extent, reaching from sea to sea, and being wild and uncultivated, afforded continual exercises for his zeal and patience. He traveled always on foot, sparing no pains to spread the light of the gospel amongst the unbelievers, of whom he converted and baptized great numbers. The Pelagian heresy having taken deep root among the Christians in those parts, he so vigorously opposed that fatal growing evil as entirely to banish that hydra out of the church of the Picts. Besides the recital of the whole Psalter, he performed every day several other exercises of devotion, lived in a constant union of his soul with God, and by perpetual abstinence, rigorous fasts, and other extraordinary austerities, he made his whole life an uninterrupted course of penance. Every Lent he retired from the sight and conversation of men into some desert, to hold a close communication with God in solitude. As both in his virtues and labors he imitated the apostles, so God was pleased to authorize his preaching by conferring on him an apostolic grace of the miraculous powers. Out of his monks and disciples he sent many missionaries to preach the faith in the north of Scotland, in the Isles of Orkney, in Norway, and Iceland. In the beginning of the usurpation of Morcant Maur, St. Kentigern was obliged to fly into Wales, where he stayed some time with St. David at Meneva, till Cathwain, uncle to King Melgwyn Gwynedd, a religious prince of part of Denbighshire, bestowed on him the land at the meeting of the rivers Elwy and Clwyd, on which he built a famous monastery and school, called from the river Elwy, Leon Elwy, or absolutely Elgwy, where a great number of disciples and scholars soon put themselves under his direction. St. Kentigern was here when St. David died in 546, or rather in 544, when the 1st of March fell on a Tuesday. After the death of the usurper Morcant, Rhydderch returned from Ireland and recovered his crown, and St. Kentigern, leaving his school to the care of St. Asaph, went back to Glasgow, taking with him several hundreds of his scholars, their number having probably been much increased after the death of Daniel, Bishop of Bangor, which happened between the years 542 and 545. The return of St. Kentigern to his see is generally placed around the year 560, nor can it be placed later, since in 565 he had a conference with St. Columbo, when that holy man came over to Scotland in order to convert the northern Picts, to whom St. Kentigern had already sent missionaries. Warton therefore justly places the residence of St. Kentigern in Wales from the year 543 to 560. King Rhydderch powerfully seconded the zeal of our saint in all his undertakings, being his constant friend and protector, as were the two princes who afterwards succeeded him. The valor of Rhydderch and these two successors, which is highly commended by an ancient author Ennius and other British historians, was the bulwark of their dominions against the inroads of the Saxons. St. Kentigern employed his zeal all this time with wonderful success in correcting abuses, reforming the manners of his flock, and propagating the faith, was favored with a wonderful gift of miracles, and died in 601 aged 85 years. His tomb in his titular church at Glasgow was famous for miracles, and his name was always most illustrious in the Scottish calendars. This is also the octave of the Epiphany. The principal object of the devotion of the Church on this day is the baptism of our Savior by St. John in the Jordan. We learn from the Great Council of Oxford in 1222 that it was then kept a holy day of the third class, on which all were obliged to hear Mass, though they might work afterwards. In France and Germany, all servile work was forbidden on it. By the capitulars of Louis le Débonnaire, the Emperor Theodosius II forbids all civil courts and transactions during 8 days before the festival of the Epiphany and as many after it.